And joining us now is Christopher Bedford, executive editor of the Common Sense Society. Chris, good to be with you today, albeit a somber occasion. That said, as we mark the anniversary of 9/11, what are your reflections, Chris, on this day of 22 years after those horrific terrorist attacks?
No, it's important that we talk about this. It's important that we have these speeches. It's important that people read about this, know about this. I'm on the board of Young Americans for Freedom, where we've planted flags now for every one of the victims of the 9/11 attacks for decades on college campuses, on the National Mall. We're working on it today. And it's an important thing to do because, well, people my age remember this crystal clear. Well, my father was my age exactly on the day that 9/11 happened. Right now, there's not a single high school student in the country who was alive when that happened. And there are very few college students who are alive during this attack. And it's important to remember this. And there are signs that this is being forgotten. Well, YAFA's put out about 14 million flags over the years we've counted to commemorate this. Vandals have started attacking them at universities across the country. We've had flags pulled down called signs of imperialism as opposed to memories. We've had messages written in chalk to just remember the victims and to honor and to pray for these victims erased by college students who think that that's somehow an awful message. So for teachers to be able to talk about this, for students to be able to talk about this, for us to be able to talk about this to our children is as important now as ever because our kids didn't live it like we did.
Yeah, and Chris, how do you think things have changed since that time? And do you think we're safer as a country today than we were back then?
Well, it's hard to say. So much has changed. The country's changed. The radical politics in the country have changed. The parties have grown further apart. I actually worry nowadays where we saw, for example, an attack on a country concert in Las Vegas. There was such an outpouring of wickedness with people from the internet saying, who cares? It's a bunch of redneck country fans, assuming their politics, which is an impossible thing to do. I actually worry that if there was an attack on a Republican city or a liberal city in this country, would the country still come together like we did in 9/11? Would we all still join hands? Would we be willing to put aside our differences? We are divided. And it's really important right now to remember the things that bring us together, those things that unite us. But there's been such a concerted effort, whether it's the flag or the anthem or religion, to destroy those symbols that unite us, that we're in trouble. Now, I don't think the threat from Islamic terror is what it once was in the United States. It's not what it was 10 years ago in the United States, but there's always still a threat, and more than any kind of external threat, the threat that's posed to America comes from in ourselves and what we're able to do, and if we're willing to put aside our politics to join with our neighbors again.
Yeah, so many people, are commemorating this day. President Joe Biden, though, he is really the first president not to attend a 9/11 memorial site in New York, Pennsylvania, or here in the D.C. area. What do you make of him, though, stopping over in Alaska to mark the occasion, rather than possibly, say, leaving the G20 earlier and finding himself at one of the other traditional locations?
Well, I think it's bad optics for sure. I think that it's another example of this White House team, often, which is a very young team in general, often forgetting the importance of these optics. I mean, President Barack Obama and President George W. Bush on occasion gave their remarks from the White House itself, or maybe visited with troops in some other area. For example, in Maryland, I think President Barack Obama went, as opposed to maybe in Pennsylvania or New York. But it was still in Washington, D.C., a city where you could see the Pentagon, you could see the smoke that day. I think it's fairly tone deaf for the president, or just an unforced error for him to be on his way back from traveling abroad on a day that's as momentous as this. But I mean, whether that will change many Americans' opinions on him one way or the other, I'm doubtful.
Chris, on that day, and so many of us remember it so well, the country really came together and became united as the United States of America. How do you think we can get back to that again?
We'd have to dispense with a lot of the divisive things that have been going on in this country. I mean, right now, I think there's a hard attack on the things that unite us from some left-wing activists that really don't want this country to be united. And I think while there's arguments and there's vitriol that goes from the right to the left and from the left to the right, those things that unite us, a shared history, shared heroes, a shared vision of a founding, a shared idea of a national border, a shared anthem, a shared flag, those things are fairly across the board being exclusively attacked from radical activists on the left. Sports has become politicized. All these different aspects of our lives have become politicized. medicine, vaccines, whether you wear a mask, if your kid can go to school, all politicized and generally all coming from the same direction. Until that ends, until that's kind of that idea is rejected, and an America divided by race and sex is rejected by the people who are really pushing it, well, I'm not too hopeful for seeing that unity again anytime soon.
And Chris, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate your insights as always.
Thank you.